Alright, fellow code warriors. So we just got started working on this Node application here, and as you can see, this is very ugly, and it's completely unreadable. So this actually is a working Node application. If I run node index.js, it actually runs. Hello world, and yes, this file is indeed messy. It works, but if you show this to your fellow developers, first of all, they will not like you, and especially if you show this to your boss or your client, they definitely will have a word with you, and it won't be pleasant. So, how do we prevent ourselves from getting into this predicament? We use this awesome software called Prettier, which the name basically gives it away, right? It makes your code pretty when you start using Prettier. So first, we're going to look into installing Prettier as an extension into VS Code. Alright, so if we take a look here on the left side, we can access the extensions menu in VS Code. We're going to search for Prettier. It's the first one on the list. We're going to install this. Now, Prettier has been installed, but it's not going to start working out of the box because it hasn't been configured in our settings. Navigate to your settings menu by going to preferences and settings, and we're going to define the formatter. So search for formatter, and in here typically it should be null, but as you can see we have the VS Code Prettier option here because we just installed it. You could go ahead and use this UI here to set all your settings, but what I like to do is actually edit the JSON itself, the settings.json. So if you actually navigate up here, this little icon here, open settings JSON, so you can add basically your properties, your settings properties here, and define the value here, which is going to overwrite whatever your settings are set in a global or in a workspace or whatnot. So this is my preferred method of doing it, just so there's one place that you can see all the settings. Just a lot easier for me. But yeah, let's look at what actually needs to be configured here in order for it to be useful. So we're going to open up the Prettier documentation here. So how you do that is go to the extensions and then click on the Prettier option. So here we got it installed, and these are the settings that you can save into the settings.json. You can set the default formatter here. You can set specific formatter for specific file types, and that's actually what I'm going to do. I'm going to leave the default formatter as null. So it's going to use whatever the global is, which is null right now. But I'm going to use this Prettier extension specifically for all JavaScript files, which are our NodeJS files. So I'm going to copy paste this into here. And also, I'm going to copy paste this property. The format on save is anytime you save a JS file, it will run the Prettier functionality on top of it. So it would format your code whenever you save your file. And we're going to set that to true because I want that to happen. Now that's basically it. Once you have the settings.json saved, your settings are in effect. So I can navigate back to this beautifully unreadable code, and it's going to format it. Let's say I just add a space and then I save this file. There we go. The magic happened. When I saved, the Prettier went through all my code and then prettified my code. And it's basically as simple as that. Alright, so furthermore, you have the ability to actually configure some of the Prettier parameters so that you can determine the behavior of Prettier. If we take a look at the Prettier documentation, if you actually look at configuring Prettier and the options menu, these are some of the parameters that you can mess with. For example, tab width, how much space does a tab take? Some people default to 2, some people do 4. It depends on where you are or what the expectations are from either your boss or your client. But there's a whole bunch of options here. So let's take a look at how to configure some of these Prettier parameters. So let's say in my code here, let's say my code here that I want to use single quotes instead of double quotes. And instead of the tab taking up 2 spaces, let's say I want the tab to take something crazy like 12 spaces or something. You can do that by looking at the documentation and see that the tab width is a property name. The first method is changing the actual settings.json. So you can add a property, a prettier option here, prettier.tab width, and then set the tab width here. So if you save this settings, and then you go back here, you can actually format by clicking this button here as well, format document. So you see now the tab width has changed, right? It's now 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 12. 12 spaces. So we changed here. We can change this back to either 4, save, and then resave this file. It's going to be 4 spaces now instead of the 12 that we had. So in order to change the double quotes to single quotes, Prettier has that option. Single quote. Single quote is either true or false. So let's say I want it to be true. I want to only use single quotes in my JavaScript files. I define the property and I set that to true. I save this settings file, and then if I save this file again, you see now the double quotes, all the double quotes have been changed into a single quote. So you can define the prettier, options in the settings.js if you want. But there's other ways to go about doing this as well. Let's go back to the Prettier documentation, configuration file. Prettier uses the cosmic config configuration file support. That means you can configure Prettier via, and this is the order of precedence that it takes. So let's try this one. Let's add the Prettier key in our package.json file and see if Prettier actually picks it up. So you can create a package.json file in here, which generally, when you have a Node project and you install different Node modules, if you initialize the Node application, it's going to have this in here. We can define the prettier option here as well, and then copy paste these parameters into here. We don't need the prettier dot here, just delete those. So once we save this package.json, when Prettier runs, let's also save this, so it's updated. So the tab width and single quotes aren't defined here anymore, but it's actually defined in the package.json. Now when we run this, it's reading now off of this package.json configuration file. So we can change this, for example, to 12, and let's change the single quotes back to, false. In that case, when I use the double quote here, Prettier should not replace those double quotes. If I save, voila, there we go. Oh, actually, it changed all the single quotes into double quotes. So you see this package.json is now the configuration file, and this is now a project-specific configuration that you can make. So you can have multiple projects, multiple different package.json that has different settings here. Let's change this back to 4, and I do want to use single quotes. Save, and then save this file again. Prettier is going to run. It's going to read the new package.json parameters, and it's going to format it accordingly. The second way, which is probably more common, is using the prettierrc file that lives in the root of the folder. So instead of the package.json, let me just get rid of this. I can create a prettierrc file here, and then it looks very similar. It looks very similar to the one that in the package.json. But you can define the tab width here. Let's just define it something crazy like 12. Save this file. Now, when Prettier runs, it's not going to find anything in the package.json, so it's going to use this to configure itself. So Prettier is now going to run 12 spaces. And then we can change this back. Oh, I don't know. Let's do like, no, not 120. That's too much. Let's say 20. We save this back. boom, the new configuration is run. So the that's three main ways to configure Prettier, the Prettier configuration. If you're just a single developer, might as well just put it in here and set it. But if there's a project that multiple people are working on and you want to enforce some sort of consistency across the different developers, across a team, generally you would use either this, you having a prettierrc, or defining it in the package.json. I hope that video was helpful, and if you learned something new today, please like and comment on the video with any questions or comments. Please subscribe to our channel for future updates as well. Game on, programmers!